Yes, good morning, all of you. Good to see you back again. So, we did last session talk about a very important concept, the Krebs cycle. And today we go into a fantastic topic, the ETS, the electron transport system, in which actually NADH plus H plus will produce 3 ATP, FADH2 will produce 2 ATP. सबसे important, oxygen will be used. If you remember, glycolysis, no oxygen was used. Acetylation, Krebs cycle, no oxygen was used. And we say C6H12O6 plus 6O2 gives 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O plus energy. तो कौन से स्टेप पे ऑक्सीजन यूज होता है? In this final step called as इलेक्ट्रॉन ट्रांसपोर्ट सिस्टम, इसमें ऑक्सीजन यूज होता है. And we will beautifully analyze it. But before we go into the ETS, let us study a little about the mitochondria. So first we go into the mitochondria and analyze the structure of the mitochondria. What is the mitochondria all about? सर, ये है सेल, और सेल के अंदर होता है न्यूक्लियस, और छोटे छोटे ऑर्गेनील्स होते हैं which are called as mitochondria. One mitochondria, ultra small structure, has a length of about 3 to 4 microns and a width of around 0.5 to 1 micron. काफी छोटे छोटे होते हैं. Each mitochondria is a lens shaped structure or an egg shaped structure having two membranes. One outer membrane which is smooth. So this is the smooth outer membrane, and that is the outer mitochondrial membrane. Whereas an inner mitochondrial membrane is not smooth, it is thrown into many finger-like projections which are called as cristae. इन जो finger like projections है, इन्हें क्या कहते हैं? Cristae. So these are cristae which are present inside, and both the outer and the inner mitochondrial membranes are made up of lipoproteins. They are made up of lipoproteins, lipids or fats. Like Vishal sir taught you, sorry, the fluid mosaic model, all membranes are made up of lipoproteins. So similarly, the outer mitochondrial membrane and the inner mitochondrial membrane are made up of lipoproteins. And in between the two membranes are found a space which is called as the inner mitochondrial or intermembranous space. So that space is called as the intermembranous space. अभी सबसे important, we have two mitochondrial membranes with intermembranous space. Inside the mitochondria is found a jelly-like substance, and that jelly-like substance is called as the matrix of the mitochondria. In the matrix of the mitochondria takes place the Krebs cycle. Where does the Krebs cycle take place? In the matrix of the mitochondria. In the cytoplasm takes place glycolysis. Cytoplasm takes place glycolysis, and we have two molecules of pyruvic acid which are formed, and pyruvic acid enters into the matrix of the mitochondria where it undergoes the Krebs cycle. And within the mitochondria is found a DNA which is called as the mitochondrial DNA. तो याद रखना, cell has its own DNA, which is the nuclear DNA, but mitochondria has its own DNA, and using its own DNA, the mitochondria is capable of self-replication. तो ऐसा नहीं कि जब न्यूक्लियस डिवाइड होता है तब माइटोकॉन्ड्रिया डिवाइड होते हैं. अगर एक सेल में एनर्जी की रिक्वायरमेंट बढ़ जाती है, सपोज यू आर रनिंग, दैट मींस यू नीड मोर एनर्जी. हु आर द पावर हाउसेस ऑफ द सेल? माइटोकॉन्ड्रिया. देन यूजिंग द डीएनए, the mitochondria are able to double in number, triple in number, and mitochondria are called as self-replicating independent cell organelles or self-replicating semi-autonomous self-organelles. They are self-replicating semi-autonomous cell organelles. So they are semi-autonomous self-organelles. Semi-autonomous cell organelles. तो ये माइटोकॉन्ड्रिया की स्पेशलिटी होती है. And not given in your books, but ये है DNA. Segments of DNA are called as genes. And segments of DNA are called as genes. Each gene undergoes transcription and translation, which Arif sir just taught you कि एक gene DNA होता है, it undergoes transcription to form an RNA called as an mRNA, and this mRNA then goes into a ribosome. And in the ribosome, the mRNA undergoes translation to form a protein. And that protein is called as an enzyme. So DNA forming mRNA is called as transcription, and mRNA in the ribosome forming a protein is called as translation. And by transcription and translation, it forms proteins, enzymes. Which enzymes? It forms enzymes required for the Krebs cycle. So, sir, समझो you have a gene here. It undergoes transcription and translation to form citrate synthetase. And it forms citrate synthetase, which will form citric acid. Some other gene will form an enzyme to form a conatase. Some other gene will form an enzyme which is oxalosuccinic dehydrogenase. And some other gene will form an enzyme which is called as decarboxylase, and some other gene will form an enzyme called as succinyl kinase, and some other gene will form thiokinase, succinyl thiokinase, and some other gene will form an enzyme called as fumarase, and some other gene will form an enzyme called as malate dehydrogenase. In other words, कौन से enzymes बनेंगे? All the enzymes which are required for the Krebs cycle. So Krebs cycle enzymes are made with the help of DNA by genes which undergo transcription and translation. ट्रांसक्रिप्शन एंड ट्रांसलेशन से सारे एंजाइम्स बनते हैं and it will form enzymes which are required for the Krebs cycle. So that is the function of the DNA inside the mitochondria. It helps the mitochondria to undergo replication, and the genes form enzymes which are required for Krebs cycle. Beautiful point. Now, सबसे important, where does glycolysis take place in the, we have understood it many times, in the cytoplasm. Where does Krebs cycle take place? Krebs cycle takes place inside the matrix of the mitochondria, which is a third step, ETS, electron transport system, will take place in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. तो याद रखना, golden words में बता रहा हूं, glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm, Krebs cycle takes place in the matrix of the mitochondria, and ETS, electron transport system, takes place on the inner membrane of the mitochondria. Electron transport system takes place on the inner membrane of the mitochondria. And very beautiful words. In the inner membrane, which is thrown into finger-like projections called cristae. Cristae are having over them small round particles which are called as F1 particles. तो ये है cristae, उनके ऊपर you have small rounded particles which are called as F1 particles. तो ये है F1 particles. F1 particles are also called as oxysomes. F1 particles, also called oxysomes, are also called as elementary particles. So F1 particles or oxysomes are also called as elementary particles. So we have three names: F1 particles, we have oxysomes, also called as elementary particles. Each F1 particle has a base. The base which is attached to the crista. Base is attached to the crista. From the base arises a stalk, and that stalk leads to a rounded head. So once again, we have a base, we have a stalk, and we have a rounded head. We have a base, we have a stalk, and we have a rounded head. We have a base, a stalk, and a rounded head. Sir, why do we have cristae? Why is the inner membrane thrown into cristae? जितने ज्यादा cristae होंगे, that much is the surface area available for all these F1 particles. जितने cristae होंगे, utne we will have surface area for all these F1 particles. That means F1 particles have got some very important function to perform. What is the function of the F1 particles? The base is called as F0. What is the base called as? Base is called as F0. The stalk is called as F5, F6. Stalk is called as F5, F6. And सबसे crucial, the head is called as F1 particle. The head is called as F1 particle. This head or F1 particle has an enzyme called ATP synthase enzyme. नाम से मालूम पड़ रहा है ATP synthase enzyme will help in the synthesis of the ATP. जो NADH plus से 3 ATP बनते हैं, FADH2 से 2 ATP बनते हैं, वो actual ATP कहाँ बनता है? That actual ATP is made in the head of the F1 particle along with the enzyme called ATP synthase. So, ये जितने भी heads हैं, all these heads present everywhere, all these heads, ये सब stock है, ये है base, और ये जो heads है, it is these heads which will help in synthesizing the ATPs, because they have the enzyme called ATP synthase enzyme. So once again, where does the electron transport system take place in the electron transport system takes place in the inner mitochondrial membrane. वहां electron transport system होगा. But where is the actual ATP produced? Actual ATP is produced in the head of the F1 particle. Why? Because the head has a written enzyme called as ATP synthase enzyme. So once again, golden words. Where does glycolysis take place? Glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm. Where does Krebs cycle take place? Krebs cycle takes place inside the matrix of the mitochondria. Where does electron transport system ETS take place? Electron transport system takes place in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. There is where electron transport system ETS takes place. There is actual synthesis of ATP done. Actual synthesis of ATP is done in the heads of the F1 particle who have an enzyme called as ATP synthase enzyme. Beautiful. And what does the DNA what does the cell replicate with the help of? Cell replicates with the help of its own DNA, which will do two things. It will multiply the number of mitochondria, and also it will produce enzymes, and those enzymes will be required for the Krebs cycle to take place. So this is in detail everything about the mitochondria. Beautiful structure. Let's now understand how will the ETS, electron transport system, actually take place.